perhaps that VP role for you isn't a VP of surgical services or operations somewhere. Perhaps it's a VP of business strategy at an educational company, or a VP of product development at a sterile processing product company. So there are certainly a lot of opportunities out there to step into those types of roles as well.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
What's up, Clean Freaks? Hank Balch here in studio, and we have got the wrap-up to season 23 in store for you today, this whole season, on the roles that make us great. And this is the Vice President episode. We're going to be talking about VPs in SPD. We're going to be talking about VPs broadly in the hospital setting. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on what it looks like to be a VP maybe outside of the hospital, and how that still fits into this career ladder that we've been talking about all season. So I know you're going to like it, regardless of what your title is and regardless of where you want to be. Even if you don't want to ever be a VP yourself, we're also going to talk about why it still matters to you and how it can help you love your job even more in whatever roles that you have today in sterile processing. So hang with us. We'll be right back in studio with my favorite VP, Bobby Parker. We'll be right back.
I'm Bobby Parker.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, Clean Freaks, here we are in studio. Bobby Parker, VP at Beyond Clean. Hey, we're talking about VPs today, Bob. Isn't that ironic?
Oh, the irony. Yep. I can assuredly say that my work here at Beyond Clean has been the first VP title that I've ever held. But yeah, it's interesting to start thinking about vice presidents in healthcare, because even in my time in sterile processing and even at the manager level, I didn't spend a ton of time thinking about VPs. We've talked to some of them here at Beyond Clean and beyond, just in administration at general, but their role in the department is vitally important. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to diving into what it is that a VP does, who might be one related to your sterile processing department out there in the field, and whether or not the VP title has any place in your visionary future for what your career might look like. So this will be a fun one.
Yeah, these are the suits, or, the suit, skirts, or dresses, whatever they're called. These are the ones you see in the hallway that they're not coming to work for the most part and changing into scrubs. They're coming to work and they're staying in their professional attire. They're staying in the administrative area. Sometimes they got offices, if they're VP of surgical services, sometimes those offices are closer to the operating room. But with that distance, often comes a disconnect, and we'll talk about if and why and how you can bridge that kind of gap. But yeah, let's start at the beginning here, Bob, and just say, hey, whether or not you see them, you got a VP somewhere in this career ladder that's above you in the sterile processing. And the question that we can kind of start with is, why should people care who their VP of sterile processing or VP of surgical services is? Why should a tech care?
Well, somebody related to your department cares who that person is. It might be your director. It might be your director of surgery, but somebody cares a whole lot about what that VP thinks of your department. So I guess a good place to start would be just describing what what the vice president is, what they do. And they're one of those administrative level employees. Their primary goal is going to be outcomes, right? They want to make sure that the hospital, thinking of it as a workflow, as a system, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? So a big chunk of their responsibility is going to be related to budgets. Are we spending what we should be spending on staffing, on supplies? Are we controlling that spending? Is our staffing and vacancies appropriate? But then another piece of it is going to be that clinical edge. What are our clinical outcomes like? Are our surgeons happy? Often these VP level folks are going to be the ones who get the earful of it if the surgeon is unhappy with what's going on in the sterile processing department. And perhaps your VPs don't know what or where sterile processing is. I would be surprised if the vice president of, that's responsible for surgery has spent much time in your sterile processing departments in particular. And I think that's not necessarily a problem, but as we're going to get into later, Hank, I think you and I would agree that as sterile processing technicians, it would be in our best interest and our manager's best interest for them to at least know who we are, know a little bit about what we do, and that we're kicking butt down here in sterile processing.
Yeah, it's only a problem. I don't care if my VP knows how to find their way to sterile processing by themselves, as long as they're supporting me at the level that needs to happen. But typically, if they can't find their way to SPD, that means that you're at the bottom of their priority when they're out there advocating for those budgets, the finances that you talked about. And it's a zero-sum competitive game out there when it comes to staffing. For instance, on the budgeting side, is those dollars have to come from somewhere and they have to go to somewhere. And that somewhere could be the emergency room. It could be ICU. It could be med surg. It could be the operating room. It could be EVS. It could be sterile processing. And yeah, these VP, many times, as you mentioned, those are the ones kind of helping to direct those funds, either at the highest level, they're the ones that says this is it, or, they're in between that and the CFO, kind of directing in the CFO's ears of, hey, if we need to meet this goal in surgery, we need to direct more resources down here to sterile processing. And so understanding of the impact that SPD has on the OR's ability to be efficient is a critical skill set at that VP role, because if they don't understand that, they may be throwing resources at the operating room thinking, well, that's what's driving the revenue. We're going to keep investing in the OR, not realizing that the engine of the operating room, as far as the instrumentation, is sterile processing. And without those resources, very quickly, whatever goals of efficiency or quality or clinical outcomes you may have, if SPD is not being supported at the VP level, it's not going to come to fruition.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The illustration that I like to use around surgical efficiency and what that VP really cares about is a three-legged race. We sometimes, even in sterile processing, get a bit siloed in our thinking. And, we have these needs. We need more positions. We need more equipment to be able to keep up with what's going on in the OR. And when we see those resources get directed elsewhere, our feelings get hurt. But that VP, they're looking at surgery operations as a whole. And if you're going to get more throughput, if patients are going to be kept safe, all the boats need to rise with the tide at the same level. I say a three-legged race. It's really more like a 17-legged race of all these people with their ankles tied together. And if one department is the one that's lagging behind, the whole row is going to fall down. You're not going to be very efficient in surgery. So in a lot of cases, and the one that we harp on a lot at Beyond Clean, is that sterile processing often is that guy with weights on his ankles that can't keep up because they just don't have the resources. But it could be somewhere else. It might be your anesthesia department that's not able to provide anesthesia services to be able to have more cases, to keep sterile processing busy, and on and on and on it goes. And so, yeah, very important for your VP to know who the sterile processing department is, what you do, and particularly what your needs are, because if they're not aware of that, they may assume that that box has already been checked and we need to pay our attention elsewhere if we're going to get more efficiency and more cases out of our OR.
I want to talk about in a moment here, Bobby, I want to talk about what it would look like to get into this role. One of the visions for this series, obviously, is to look at all these various roles and to outline a little bit about that pathway or that kind of preparatory steps you can take right now. If you're a technician, if you're a manager, and like one day I want to be a VP of surgical services, I want to get there. But before I get there, I think this is a good time as any to say, okay, we want our VPs to know what's going on in SPD. Or if you're a VP listening to this and you're like, you know what, I do need to probably have a little better pulse on what's happening or not happening down in SPD. The question is, what's the best way to do that? Like, we've all seen the tours of the suits come into SPD to get the bunny suits on over their suits and to go walk around, and they're in and out in, 10, 15 minutes. Oh, that was nice. It's kind of shiny in here and loud. Great work, guys. And that's it. But that's not exactly what we're asking or, pushing for in this episode right now for that, getting on the radar and that communication thing that we're lining out. So what would be one example, Bobby, of a place that you would start if you were, say, the sterile processing manager to get yourself on the radar and in front of your VP on an intentional basis?
Yeah, so I don't think the tour of the suits through the department is honestly a bad place to start. You and I experienced this as well, and we talked about this back in the technician episode of you have some rough idea of what sterile processing is until you step into the department, and then your eyes widen and roll back in your head as you see all of the activity that's going on in the department. It's not bad to start with having one of those tours and just be able to highlight what you're proud of in the department, what your routine problems are in the department. And if surgery were to increase by 10 or 15% in volume, what kind of disaster that would put you in the current state of equipment in the department today. And just getting that snapshot in time is honestly not a bad idea. And depending on who it is that you're touring through and what your role is in the department, you may not be able to secure a one-on-one meeting with that individual frequently, but I bet you know who does get a one-on-one with that individual. And so making a good relationship with them, this is probably your director of surgery, making sure that you have a good connection to that person who's got a connection to administration, and making sure they know what your needs are and what your obstacles are and where the pain points are as surgery is slowly growing, I think is a really important one. But I don't think that's the only way that you can make an impact with people who are above your, direct one-up report. We've talked a number of times about things that you can and should be doing culturally, just in the leadership team of the hospital, to help brag on and underline the achievements of your department, whether that's a department newsletter that gets sent out to all the leaders talking about the new and great things that are happening in your department, but also just your participation in safety meetings at the hospital, not choosing to allow that meeting to be some place where you're a passive participant because you don't have anything necessarily to report on a disaster that happened, but getting actively involved in participating and reporting on good catches, on process improvements that are taking place, pieces of data that you want to report out on of things that you're trying to improve in the department. Not only does that help you be accountable to those leaders as you're reporting on those things, it also gives you some exposure that we know what we're talking about. We're working hard at improving clinical outcomes here, and we have some obstacles that are keeping us from getting from, a 9.5 all the way to a 10. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of creative things you can do to get out in front of that leader, even if you don't get your weekly one-on-one with them.
Yeah, you're reminding me in your reference to the safety and quality. One of the projects that we did that I'm sure you'll remember is there's this concept called safety coaches in our health system. And the requirement, they asked was, hey, find one person in every department to train to become a safety coach. And you would train in these various error prevention techniques and kind of understand the culture of safety. And, we got one or two people trained who were like, hey, this is great. Why don't we try to get the most people in the entire health system trained in a single department? And I think we end up getting like 50% of our department trained. I mean, I'm talking like 20, 25 people trained as safety coaches. And, that did two things for us. It obviously got all that training and insight into our team, but it got us on the radar in a big, unique, creative, and good way of the VPs, of the administrators, of what the heck is going on. These guys are just like addicted to safety coach training in SPD, what and why. And I mean, as one example, but a very powerful example of how you can be creative to leverage what's already going around the health system and training opportunity around you, but then doing that with purpose greater than just what, that face forward opportunity of the training would be. I want to throw out one more thing too, and I forget how you phrased it, but going back to, you probably know who is having one-on-ones with the VP. One of the skill sets I leveraged a lot as a manager and a director, and this goes back to the comment that I made on the last episode talking about politics. I befriended the executive assistant of the administrators, the CEO, the CMO. They all kind of shared a little row of offices, and so they had one executive assistant. And I was really, really thoughtful and friendly and kind and patient with this executive assistant. And I would bring her like little gifts on Executive Assistant Day and, stand there and just talk about life, for 10, 15 minutes to build a relationship so that I could go and ask her, hey, is there any way you could get me on Dr. So-and-so's schedule next week? I'd really just like to have coffee with them or whatever. Can you slide me in? And you'd be amazed if you treat them with respect and kindness, not, just to get what you want, like you really are being friendly, you value that person, but with some also strategy of this is the person that can get you in front of those VPs, of those administrators. It's really, really good process to consider, I would say.
That's funny. A handwritten note can go a long way. You taught me that when I started as a manager. That was, I think, part of my requirements on my evaluation was that I wrote handwritten notes to all the managers that supported me, all the OR leaders, and yeah, I appreciated that thoughtfulness. So rewinding a couple of questions ago, I feel like the start of your question about how do we get kind of on the radar of our VP, you started by saying, there's a lot of different roads into becoming a vice president. And so our listeners probably aren't familiar with a VP of sterile processing. There might be some of them out there. I haven't seen many of them pop up on the job market. So we're primarily talking about a vice president, maybe over surgical services, maybe of nursing in a particular area. And so their job responsibilities is going to be a lot broader than just maybe what a sterile processing director would be. The types of activities of, managing the budget and looking at clinical outcomes and negotiating contracts may have some similar looking activity to it, but just the scope is going to be much broader. And so as we think about, who are they in their facilities and whether or not vice president belongs somewhere in my future and just career trajectory in the hospital, I wondered, Hank, if you have any thoughts around how to find out if you would be a good vice president. How do you get considered for one of those roles? What kinds of roles are out there? And in some respects, as we talk about this is like two poor guys telling you how to become rich, right? Because neither of us have done one of these roles in a hospital setting before. But just to give a little bit of color and perspective, what kind of roles are we talking about?
Yeah, I think it's a really unique answer to this question as opposed to maybe to the questions we ask about, like, how do you prepare to become a sterile processing manager or how do you become a sterile processing director? What we're asking now is across the board, how do you prepare to be a hospital administrator? Because if you can lead a vice president of surgical services, you can do a lot of other jobs probably just as well without knowing all the technical aspects of, that's happening on the ground floor. That's the responsibility of your lead techs, of your supervisors, of your managers, of your directors. You got a lot of people between you and those day-to-day clinical decisions, but it's the strategy piece. It's that main responsibility. So I think one of the big call outs is you're probably not going to get there. Just being realistic, and there are likely exceptions out there, but you're probably not going to be able to get there just staying in the sterile processing lane of credentials and education. So what I mean by that is You can have all the sterile processing certifications. You can have all the Beyond Clean micro credentials. You can have all of the continuing education that's ever been created out there in sterile processing. Put that on your resume for VP of Surgical Services, and it's not going to really open the kinds of doors that you want to open and be as competitive as you want to be to get those jobs. So question is, what would or what will, and we've seen most likely out there in our own experiences, but also in some of the folks that we've interviewed on the show. I think you referenced on the last episode, Ben Broderson that we interviewed started as a sterile processing technician, worked his way up to president at a hospital. So he's been through the VP role and beyond. But one of the things, that Ben did is he pursued his Master's of Business Administration, MBA program, specifically because of what you've been calling out again and again here, Bobby, is at this VP role, budget's almost always number one. Like, you got strategy in there that's mixed, but you can't impact and execute on strategy if you're missing your budget numbers, right? Your staffing's going to run out. Your supplies are going to run out. You got to get the numbers tight. In order to do that, you got to have some real deep business acumen. Now, MBA isn't going to teach you everything that you need to know to be a great vice president or anything like that. It's not even going to teach you how to run a business, but it's going to introduce you to those concepts at a level that's much higher than anything that you would get in an SPD training program, obviously, and anything that you would get in the average undergraduate program that many managers and directors have. So MBA, definitely one of those routes we see. I would also say a master's in public health. You see a lot of masters of public health out there in admin level. That's not as heavy on the financial side, obviously, but it gives you a much broader understanding of all of the big trends around healthcare, how to manage those things at a micro and a macro level. The other thing I'll throw out that we've seen, personally as well, Bobby, is the emphasis on efficiency and driving efficiency in healthcare. Process improvement is another phrase that you'll see out there. And that comes through programs like, Six Sigma training, lean training. You see a lot of folks that are pursuing those kind of green, yellow, white, black belts, specifically within healthcare process improvement. So I think that is a really smart addition to your resume as you're prepping for that level that can set you apart from just the average person out there that has a lot of clinical experience.
Yeah, that's a good call out. And that's the one that I wanted to bring up as well. I'd say our closest neighbor in healthcare is probably supply chain, just thinking about the role that they fill in the facility. And while certainly a sterile processing manager couldn't just step in and be a director of supply chain without any kind of friction initially, the concepts are at least somewhat similar in terms of stocking and supplying, depending on what types of roles your sterile processing department does. And so those operations style training, like a Lean Six Sigma, could go a long way in terms of equipping you to move more into like a VP of operations or a COO, a Chief Operations Officer at a facility. And I believe that's even the route that Ben went as we talked about it. So that's kind of one trajectory that you could go in terms of career. The other way that it would be silly for us not to mention is there are some VP roles related to sterile processing that aren't a VP of sterile processing position in a hospital, right? So there's a whole vendor world out there, a whole industry that is set on trying to improve sterile processing, whether that's through consulting or whether it's through education and certification, or whether it's through product development and creating things that are going to solve problems in the industry. And every one of those organizations value sterile processing experience very highly. And so if you're sharp and you want to pursue sterile processing specifically and making this industry just elevated and making it easier for technicians to do their jobs well, perhaps that VP role for you isn't a VP of surgical services or operations somewhere. Perhaps it's a VP of business strategy at an educational company, or a VP of product development at a sterile processing product company. So there are certainly a lot of opportunities out there to step into those types of roles.
And, Bobby, I think we kind of joked about it at the beginning of this interview, but obviously you're a VP of clinical solutions at Beyond Clean. And, for those VP roles that you kind of alluded to, both inside and outside of the hospital setting, the other thing that I definitely want to call out here is the cross-functional experience, especially on the clinical side, is extremely valuable. So what I mean by that is if you know sterile processing and you're a nurse, if you know sterile processing and you're a surgical tech, if you know sterile processing and you know supply chain, that kind of dual threat.
Or you know how to code.
Yeah. Whatever it is, if you can supplement, those two skill sets, you become extremely valuable to a large number of people. I know I said that before, that you probably don't just want to stay in your sterile processing lane, but I think it's really, really important. Like, we have that conversation all the time for folks that are reaching out and saying, hey, I want to work for Beyond Clean. And, typically it's people that have been in sterile processing, they're really good at SPD, but I'm like, hey, so what else can you do? And, that question kind of surprises them sometimes, but it's going back to this, is to thrive at the administrative level, inside and outside, to your point, you've got to be able to leverage multiple skill sets at a high level. Not really good at SPD. I know a little bit about sales. We're really good at SPD, but I'm kind of a little bit operationally minded. You got to have both of those, really strong. So if you're getting that through an MBA program, if you're getting that because you've been an operating room nurse in the past, or because you've been a surgical tech in the past, you can get that a lot of different places. But I think coming into this mindset of, I want to one day be a VP at a company like Beyond Clean, or at a company like one of the many manufacturers and vendors that sponsor our education, they do hire from SPD, to Bobby's point, but they prefer to hire, and I'll just kind of speak on their behalf, they prefer to hire people that can do the things that they're already doing at scale, or at least have that background experience and training educationally, through side hustles, whatever it is that you can get that additional experience. That's going to put you right in the place that you want to be the most effective applicant.
Well said. And lest we turn this episode into a how to become a VP episode, let's wrap by just circling back to, as a sterile processing technician, why should you care about the VP in your particular hospital? You may not meet them any particular day, but what they're there for is to make sure that the patients that you serve are being served safely, and that we're doing so with enough efficiency that the other patients who also need surgery also get theirs. And so as a technician, as a supervisor, as a manager, the daily operations that you're doing in the department really matter. The outcomes, the number of trays that get sent to your OR that upsets that particular surgeon because they weren't perfect and had a defect in it, that kind of stuff matters on the bottom line for the facility. It matters for patient outcomes, and it matters for the VP that is supporting and giving resources to your department.
Yeah, Bob, a lot of these VPs, we alluded to this on the director episode, but this is even more true for VP. They're the relational manager for many of these surgeons. And they're the ones that have recruited them, or a big part of recruiting them to the health system. They're the ones that are keeping them. And there's all kinds of, contracts and discussions at play, right? It's like, do they like their anesthesia team? Do they have the nurses and the technicians they want? Do they have the nice new room that they want? All the supplies they want? The VPs are critically involved in all those decisions. And so back to your point, why should you care? Because a good VP is going to be driving that strategy effectively at the high level to keep your hospital system afloat and driving good revenue, which means if you got good revenue, then all those other requests that you're putting in, if it's new staffing, if it's specialty positions like we talked about in previous episodes, if it's new stuff like, scope inspection devices or borescopes that are just not the run-of-the-mill stuff that you would see in your normal budget, but you need somebody at a VP level perhaps to sign off on it, you really want that person to know who you are and be supporting what's going on in SPD. So the last piece of that, and I kind of told you this, I think, before this episode, is the VP is the one who hires your manager and your director. So if you want good managers and directors, you want a good VP that understands the needs of your department. And if you end up with a manager director that needs some more accountability, or maybe they're just not the right person for the job, you also want to have enough trust with that VP to be able to transparently communicate to the VP so that they can help get that adjusted for you. So I think this is a great place here, Bobby, to wrap up this episode, but I've really enjoyed the conversation today. Bob. So, this is the wrap up for season 23, episode 8 of The Roles That Make Us Great. And we've come a long way from the technician, brand new off the street, knows nothing about SPD, all the way up to almost the tippy top of the hospital career ladder at the VP level and beyond. But, at a high level, kind of looking back, what has really stuck out to you about either this episode or this season?
Well, I would say the season as a whole has just reminded me how much that I love this particular industry. So many people out there don't even know what sterile processing is, who we are, and those t-shirts about like what I do, what people think I do, what I actually do, those are well-founded because we live that experience every time we try to explain to a family member or somebody on the street what we do for a living. But it is so uniquely tied into patient care, and the barrier to entry is still fairly low in terms of who's qualified to enter into this role. And as we illustrated, as we move through kind of the career trajectory and pattern through these episodes, the sky's the limit in terms of where this industry could take you personally and professionally. And even at the very top, it doesn't stop being about how do we improve the lives of people who need care that's been put in the hands of our surgeons. And so absolutely love sterile processing. If I had to pick a favorite episode, I'm probably going to say educator, just because that's what I do on a daily basis in terms of writing education and making sure that our technicians are the best equipped that they can be. But yeah, it was a fantastic season.
Yeah, Bob, the only thing that I would add to that wrap up, as you said, I think that's a fantastic wrap up. This whole thing is about the people of SPD, but the people of SPD is about the people in the OR and that are underneath the drape. They're getting their care in the operating room, and that is the mission. I will add, because this was focused on that career ladder and, built from that technician level up, one of the themes that we tried very intentionally to keep is every single member of this team has a unique value that they bring to the team that's irreplaceable by anyone else on the career ladder. So this is not a pyramid. You got people on the top and the bottom. It is a level. It's all level here because we've all got to contribute in the same ways at the same time with the same vision in order to get to where we want to go. I'll say, though, as we prep here for season 24, you can get all the roles right. You can get all the right people in place. But if the paper or if the policies, the procedures, the competencies, the IFUs, everything around documentation of our department is broken, you're still going to have a big hill to climb. So make sure to come back with us in season 24. We're going to take a couple weeks here. We're going to run some great episodes that you may have missed from past seasons, but come back with us at the kickoff of season 24. And we're going to start talking about all the ways to get your documentation right. And we're going to have some great guests from around the industry to help us tell that story. But between now and then, we want to remind you, like we do each week here at Beyond Clean, to keep fighting dirt.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.